Salutators, my potats, am's your Rave, back again with another Read with Rave video. A couple of disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1. To avoid copyright infringement, I have already gotten permission from the authors of these stories, as the authors are either myself or my friends, and depending on what story I am reading, I will have a link to the social medias in the description. Disclaimer number 2. Read with Rave is not meant for children, as the target audience is young adults and teens. So if you are a smaller child, please jump off this video and go watch my gaming or speed paint videos.
Today, I will be reading The Crossroads Planet, Book 1 of the Crossroads series, by Robert Field.
Chapter 17. Results for the first election were not available yet several weeks later. Crystal helped out both at the mine and in the house, and seemed to have a sort of truce with Lance's mother. Lance and Crystal worked together in the mine, and also took time to practice their magic together, going to an out-of-the-way hollow in the hills above the village. Lance's father was talking about the possibility of Lance and Crystal setting up some sort of household, but it would involve building a house. The land was available, but work could not commence until the spring, because the ground would be too hard to dig a cellar, and the conventional homes in the area all had cellars, both as a refuge against extreme weather, as well as storage remaining cool in the summer. Crystal had a vague idea of using magic to facilitate the process, and had discussed it with Lance. "Well, it might be possible. The family could pitch in and help," he had said. "But you'd be busy keeping the ground and air warm while the others did the actual building. Maybe you could levitate some of the larger beams into place, but some heat would be lost. Are you sure you'd be up to it?" Crystal kept pondering the notion. Lance's father had set aside a portion of his property to be theirs, a small clearing back among the trees behind the main house. One afternoon she set out by herself and summoned magical energy to generate heat. She used a spell-locking technique to hold the spell in place, while she expanded the area and intensity. Soon she was sitting in a patch of melting snow, rapidly forming a puddle. She acquired some additional energy and set up a levitation spell to keep her above the water. Locking that spell as well, she sat and waited. Soon the snow was melted over a respectable area of the clearing, and steam began to rise from the ground as the moisture evaporated. The ground beneath her became firm and dry, so she dismissed the levitation spell. Next she considered how to dig a hole. She used her spirit sight to look down into the earth where the subterranean variety of the filaments of the spirit wind flowed slowly. She acquired several of these and formed them into a grid, shaping the grid like a bowl, underground with its rim just at the surface. She moved the grid experimentally, but it had no effect on the earth in which it resided. She fed it more power, then still more power. The filaments grew in diameter until the bowl looked almost solidly. Finally, it seemed to grip the soil and would not move in response to her mental command. She channeled the power through herself to increase the force behind the command. Suddenly the chunk of earth within the bowl broke free and rose until it was several feet clear of the resulting hole. She held it there and assessed the energy drain incurred by the operation. It appeared to be minimal, as the power was clearly being fed almost entirely from the various filaments she was tapping into. Continuing her experiment, she transported the large chunk of earth out of the clearing and released the spell on it. She looked thoughtfully at the cubic yard of soil that she had excavated, and initiated a mental call to Lance. She communicated the results of her experiment to him in words and images. Lance responded, not directly in words, but in a flurry of images and emotions, a picture of a house and a sense of home. She interpreted that as an agreement on his part, more than any single word could convey. That afternoon Lance surveyed her handiwork. After that they showed Father. Crystal remembered, though, to re-establish the heat spell. The three of them stood thoughtfully at the balmy spring-like air, cloaks folded back, and considered the possibilities. Father had brought a shovel, and he tested the consistency of the soil at various places. He hemmed and hawed, and finally spoke. "Well, Crystal, I guess these able to dig okay. And I don't mind if he does, but they'll need some help to shore up the sides as it gets deeper. Best if thee clears the entire footprint of the house, but shallowly, about a foot deep. We can mark out where the outer walls will go. Then we'll need to put up the foundation walls. Concrete block and mortar is common, if not truly in keeping with ancient earth standards as we usually follow. We'll have to go to the processing plant. They keep supplies like that, in winter too, because people use the stuff occasionally in the mines. Lumber's not a problem either. They'll keep the site warm, we'll build the house. Only too glad to have ye as neighbors. Lance just stood and beamed. Crystal smiled happily, dreamily. The next day, Lance's father, true to his word, pounded stakes into the ground and used intersecting strings to delineate the decent-sized single-family dwelling. Crystal proceeded, a little at a time, and soon the entire cellar was dug to the depth of 1 foot. Zack inspected the digging, and afterwards she dug the center of the cellar deep. Eventually the cellar was dug to the full depth in the center, with sloping walls. Gradually she expanded the flat floor of the basement, and shoring materials were introduced. Finally the cellar stood completely dug and shored. A sledge came up from the plant and delivered building materials. After that, Crystal sat in the middle of the cellar and maintained balmy temperatures while the foundation walls rose around her. At the back of the house, a sloping ramp led outwards where the outside cellar entrance would be. Eventually the foundation was complete, and timbers were laid on top to support the ground floor. The floor of the cellar remained packed earth, undisturbed by the removal of the soil above. Occasional snows interrupted the process, but Crystal was able to quickly remove the accumulation. Once the floor was in place, with openings for the inside cellar stairs, the timbers for the walls were assembled. She helped to levitate the assembled walls into place while they were secured to the foundation and to each other. After this, the house was quickly topped off with timbers to support the eventual finished attic, and then the roof was put on. After that, work proceeded to finish the interior. Finally, the house was complete. There was a kitchen with a space for dining, a living room, a bedroom, and a den. Triumphantly, Lance and Crystal moved in with a handful of belongings, a bed and a few chairs. They had the fireplace to keep warm. Eventually the kitchen would have a stove, but for now they walked over to the main house for their meals. Lance and Crystal registered their co-residence with the mayor, who carefully inspected the new residents and confirmed their new legal status. Crystal duly voted in the general election, aware that the final results were announced to the village. The school would reopen. Crystal started a small magic practice, and for moderate fees she performed magic spells for the village folk who were minded to try her services. The new house stood in mute testimony to the scope of her powers, although she would not take on jobs of that magnitude lest school should reopen with jobs unfinished. So she proceeded to agree to jobs of 1 day's duration or less. The money she made was spent on furnishings for the house. Pretty soon the house was comfortably furnished, and the stove was installed in the kitchen. Lance and Crystal had breakfasts and lunches in their own place, but continued to have dinner with the rest of the family. All too soon a message arrived from the school. The school had received official notice of the certification of the results of the general election, and was therefore announcing the reopening of the school, starting with the normal beginning of the next term. Still, that gave them several more weeks before they would have to leave. A sleigh would take them as far as the school's training outpost, and from there the school would provide them with transport. Crystal had replenished her wardrobe with shopping trips to the stores in the village by the processing plant, and also had stuff in storage at the college, as did Lance. Still, this time Crystal would go back with more than she had brought, and filled out her wardrobe at the school. Lance's wardrobe at school was of course adequately stocked, but he wanted to take 1 or 2 additional items. Finally, the day came to depart. The sleigh arrived, and they loaded their trunk onto it. The trunk was actually to be Crystal's, as Lance already had a trunk at the school. They bolted the doors of their house, and were whisked away over the deep snow on a bright sunny morning with a clear blue sky. The sleigh followed a slightly more circuitous route than they had followed on their arrival, making the trip into 2 full days with a stop at the village inn. On the afternoon of the second day, the team pulled the sleigh up the south rim of the valley to the turnoff for the training camp. They spent the night at the outpost, along with the sleigh driver. In the morning, the sleigh went back down into the valley, while Lance and Crystal proceeded over the pass on horseback, towing the baggage on a sled. Well after dark, they entered by the back gate and rode the horses around to the stable. Crystal revived herself with a surge of spirit energy and levitated the baggage as they proceeded to their apartment in Master's Court. About mid-morning the next day, May arrived to greet them. "Well, well, greetings to you both. You look very picture of connubial bliss." "We certainly ought to," remarked Crystal. "For the past 2 months we've lived together in our house, which we helped to build, and our co-residence has been duly registered with and certified by the mayor of that village." "You've certainly wasted no time. But a house? Built in winter?" A surprised look stole into her face. "It wasn't so tough, really," Lance said. "After Crystal dug the cellar, all she had to do was keep the place warm and levitate occasional wall into place. My family did the rest, and I pitched in as well." "I see. So you've been practicing your skills." Mary looked pleased. "Yes," said Crystal. "We've practiced together 1 or 2 times a week. I've also done a number of jobs for the villagers, for money." "I see I shall need to reassess thy skill level very soon. Very good seeing you two back again. You will be keeping this apartment, and for now you'll be able to come and go on campus or to town as you please. I must apologize now, but I am very busy today. Must dash now. See you later." Soon after Mary left, Lance and Crystal left themselves. They wandered over to the students' court to see who else had returned. Up on Third North, their old suite stood empty. Lace was in her suite, but Bruce had not returned yet. Lace gave both Lance and Crystal thorough, unhurried, and intimate hugs and kisses, coupled with a small amount of her healing energies. "It's so good to see you two again," said Lace. "Bruce isn't back just yet. He might not get back until the first day of classes. You two seem well adjusted on the whole. This time, possibly it's me that needs the therapy." "Well," started Crystal, "I'm sure I could learn, and would be willing to. You've helped us, it's only fair that we help you in return." The "These serious? I only meant it as a tease. I'm sure I probably do need therapy, but I know that therapists are not qualified to judge on their own status. You really want to learn? Just to help me?" "Well, I don't have a specialty just yet. But if I'm going to be living in a small town, I'd just as soon have knowledge in many areas. I'm sure that if I observed your technique once or twice, that I should be able to figure out by watching within spirit sight. Mary's told me that I'm quick to study. I'm certainly innovative enough just by myself." "Well, how about this afternoon?" That afternoon, the three of them were in the bedroom of the apartment, with the inner and outer doors bolted. Lace kept a copious lecture flowing while she slowly demonstrated the various phases of the treatment. Crystal watched carefully with spirit sight, noting the colors and configurations of the various filaments of spirit energy. She also noticed that Lace used her own energy constantly to maintain the spells. On the whole, it looked relatively simple to her. Lance, relaxed by the first phase, undressed without any particular reaction. Crystal watched, unembarrassed but not unaffected, as Lace finished the second phase, and Lance had a predictable reaction. Lace looked at Crystal, and a touch of embarrassment crept into her face. "Oh, go ahead, you two. You want to anyway. Or do you mind me watching? I particularly want to see how the healing energies are administered during this phase. I also just feel like watching anyway." Lace undressed with obvious relief, and the third phase commenced forthwith. Crystal enjoyed the part of voyeur even as she struggled, albeit successfully, to observe how the spirit energies flowed. To her amazement, the sexual energies themselves were represented in her spirit sight. In order to maintain some shred of objectivity, Crystal had her computer out and was carefully taking notes of the entire process and her particular observations. Finally, Lace and Lance lay together on the bed, spent. Crystal closed her computer and allowed her own emotions free rein for a while. She noticed a strong feed of emotions were coming at her across the link of the heart bond. Curious, she widened the channel. A curious mix of emotions wafted across: doubt, guilt, much pleasure, all stirred around. Crystal herself felt the pleasure that results acquisition of knowledge, arousal from watching, and a certain amount of surprise because she felt no jealousy towards Lance. Crystal then turned her spirit sight in Lace's direction. She could see that Lace was very much drained of energy, but beyond that, she also sensed a lot of satisfaction, and it wasn't just the spirit sight that told her. Lance's snores became regular. Lace stirred and looked at Crystal. Sleep is common after therapy. In a way, it's part of it. I don't suppose thee would help me with some energy? Crystal responded by summoning energy into her hands, rather like Lace had demonstrated earlier, and, sitting beside her, moved her hands slowly over Lace's body, what she could reach of it. Wherever she detected regions depleted in energy, she replenished it. She went from Lace's feet to her head. Lace's whole face became suffused with an ecstatic expression. Lace carefully avoided disturbing Lance, and turned to embrace Crystal. Lace arose and put on a robe that she'd brought with her, and together Lace and Crystal went to the kitchen. Crystal made mugs of tea, and they sat around the table. Crystal, thee's amazing. Normally I'm so drained at the end of a therapy session that I'm doing well to feel anything. Thee replenished my energy so fully I was able to actually enjoy the experience. Not only that, but thee modified one of my techniques, using it to deliver energy instead. I think I need to talk to both of thee about the emotions between you two. They're perfectly healthy for the most part, but, well, I'd best wait to talk to Lance. Crystal, I think thee stands a good chance of learning the attitude adjustment techniques. Thee'd be good at it too, because thee can tap energies outside of thyself. Crystal looked thoughtful. Is it really necessary to have sex with the client? No, it isn't. It's up to the therapist as much as the client. All the people I've practiced on have been friends, and I've been more than willing on my part. I'm not sure how it would be with an actual client that I didn't otherwise know. At this point, Lance wandered into the kitchen, clad in his robe. He placed a packet of herbs in a mug of water and nodded to Crystal. Crystal nodded back and magically heated his water without fully taking her attention off Lace. Lance is here. Can you tell us now? Lace collected her thoughts for a moment. Well, the two of you have a good relationship between you. I can tell that. Really, the only negative thing that I can sense so far is a slight degree of guilt. I noticed a little in you, Crystal, when I treated you before we left campus. Lance, thy guilt is a little more deep-seated. Possibly it's an overreaction, a tendency to try to overcompensate for all the promiscuity of the past, as if Crystal would think less of you because of it. I can assure both of you that is not the case. You have a relationship that is well developed and secure. The occasional therapy or even outright affair will not change this. Crystal looked relieved, but Lance looked almost bemused, still caught in the byproducts of the therapeutic emotional energies. Crystal looked at Lace. Well, Lace, I ought to at least be able to try and get a reading on your condition like you showed me. Certainly, Lace agreed. Suiting her action, she proceeded to the bedroom and lay down on her stomach. Crystal sat beside her and summoned her spirit sight, drawing on extra energy to improve the clarity and also detect the lesser energies associated with the aura and emotions. She allowed her hands to become very sensitive to minor variations in energy levels, as Lace had demonstrated. Starting with Lace's feet, she carefully scanned and mentally noted the differences in the various energy levels, while she tried to sense and correct the minor energy imbalances that caused tensions to form. Everything was more or less consistent until Crystal reached the region of the heart. With her enhanced spirit sight, she unmistakably saw a single filament of spirit energy extending through Lace's body, entering from an aimless tangle in one side and proceeding purposefully straight along out the other side. A single filament? Crystal's own heart bond with Lance featured two filaments. This, therefore, might be an uncompleted heart bond. She quietly filed this piece of news and proceeded to complete the first half of the scan. Lace obligingly turned over, and Crystal scanned her other side. The readings were consistent, with the exception of the strong sexual energies, which she was unable to interpret. Possibly it was the result of the recent activity, but also it could represent an unfulfilled need. Crystal completed the entire scan, and Lace sat up. Crystal considered for a moment. I'm not sure if you're going to like what I saw. Most of it seems to make sense. What doesn't make sense is that you've got a single energy filament going through your heart and straight out to somewhere. It's rather akin to a heart bond, except that in a full heart bond, there's a second filament returning from the bondmate. What I think this means is that you've got a potential heart bond. I also have a suspicion as to who it's trying to bond with. You're reserving your heart for Bruce, aren't you? A number of emotions crossed Lace's face suddenly: surprise, confusion, and a rather tentative joy. Oh my! She gasped. So absence really does make the heart fonder, she replied, and giggled faintly. I also think that you will feel much better when you see Bruce again. I guess that this potential bond developed while you two were apart, and when you're rejoined, it will become complete. I hope he does make it back. One thing he did mention was that there was some unrest in his province, and he hoped that it wouldn't flare up. Hmm, that could be a problem. If you don't rejoin him soon, you may have to go seek him out. You've got one thing in your favor, though: the energy filament emanating from your points directly to the other heart. I can't begin to guess if there's another line from his heart pointing back at you, but that remains to be seen when you two get closer together. Which way is the line pointing now? Roughly southwest. Oh no, that means he hasn't left home yet. His route should take him straight to the capital, which is due south from here. He ought to be on the second leg by now. Her face suddenly fell. Crystal quickly embraced Lace. I don't know, dear. What I do know is that I had better get a private chat with Mistress Merriweather. She knows a great deal about heart bonding, having had one herself. That is, if you don't mind, of course. Lace nodded. I trust thee. I won't give your name unless she asks. Even then, this is a small place, and she's bound to have a good idea. Thank you for joining me on today's Read with Rave episode. If you liked, please hit that like button, comment down below if you would like to hear more, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to splash the bell icon so you never miss another video, and I will catch you all on the next wave. Goodbye!